National Democratic Program of the Eritrean People's Liberation Front. Introduction. Eritrea is situated at the crossroads of Africa and the Middle East. It is bounded by the Red Sea on the east, the Sudan on the north and west, and Ethiopia and Djibouti on the south. This strategic geographic location has helped to shape its history. To clearly understand the modern history of the Eritrean people, it is necessary to look into the ancient history of the Horn of Africa. The original inhabitants of present-day Eritrea were a Negroid African people known as the Nilotics. Later, invading Hamites from North Africa occupied what is today northern Eritrea and, intermingling with the Nilotics, began to settle in the western lowlands and northern highlands. Between 1000 and 400 BC, the Semites crossed the Red Sea from South Arabia and, invading the Eritrean plateau, began to settle there, intermarrying with the intermingled Nilotics and Hamites. The Semites, with their advanced Sabaean civilization, were able to transform Hamido-Nilotic society and founded the Aksumite kingdom. This being the general development of the ancient history of this region, there is a legendary history of 3,000 years which Ethiopian feudalists and rulers have fabricated to expand their interests. As the tale goes, a queen called Makda went to visit King Solomon in Jerusalem in 970 BC and returned to her country impregnated by him. When the child grew, he ascended the throne under the name of Menelik I and, from that time onwards, began the 3,000 years of Ethiopian history and the uninterrupted rule of the Solomonic dynasty. The principal objective of the Amhara feudalists in concocting this tale is the realization of their expansionist ambitions, to put a large country under their dictatorship through the claim of 3,000 years, to promote vainglory and banal chauvinism by falsely claiming a non-existent history of 3,000 years of independence, to make the peoples whom they rule and oppress the perpetual slaves of superstition by making their kingdom appear as though it were divinely ordained, sacred and inviolate. The ancient civilizations that existed in the past have never been, and cannot be used as a basis for the claim of territories in the modern era. If their ancient existence has any value, it belongs in the museum where it may be useful for the study of the history of man and society. To make it the basis of contemporary political relations is, however, outright fascist expansionism. Otherwise, the meaninglessness of this argument which Ethiopian rulers present to justify their aggression against and oppression of the Eritrean people is clear. The Aksumite kingdom had, extending in all corners, invaded even southwestern Arabia. It was also greatly influenced by foreign civilizations, especially Greek civilization, through commercial and cultural exchange. Nevertheless, when during the 7th century South Arabia was occupied by the Persians, Aksum's contacts across the Red Sea were cut off. The Beja tribes intensified their invasion in the north. Internally, there was the growing rebellion of certain tribes. When, under these circumstances, the Agau tribes attacked it from the south, the kingdom of Aksum crumbled. Aksumite civilization, like many of the great civilizations of the past, was thus destroyed and obliterated. Once it fell, the Aksumite kingdom never revived, and as a socio-economic system, it had no concrete economic, political, and social links with the systems that prevailed during the centuries immediately following its fall, let alone with those of the last and present centuries. The Amhara feudalists, however, have resorted to tales of a 3,000-year history in an effort to glorify their regime as a direct continuation of the Aksumite civilization and thus nurture their chauvinism and expansionism. The attempt to present the Aksumite kingdom as a supporting point for the claim that Eritrea has always been part of Ethiopia is only the feudal dream of feudal expansionists and their fascist disciples. Diopides. Although there exists no detailed record of the history of the period that immediately followed the fall of Aksum, it should be remembered that there occurred the untold year-I destruction of people, livestock, and property as a result of the internecine wars within and among competing tribes, the politico-religious aggressions that took place in the expansion of Islam and Christianity, and the slave trade which dominated all other trade and plundered enormous labor power. These were an obstacle to the development of this region and were responsible for its backwardness and its victimization by European colonialists in the 19th and 20th centuries. Otherwise, from the fall of the Aksumite kingdom to the 19th century, when countries with definite boundaries were formed with the expansion of European colonialism in Africa, there was absolutely no period when there existed an organized and centralized state in this region. When the Portuguese explored sea lanes to the east at the close of the 15th century, they began to clash at first with the Arab powers and later the Turks in an effort to control the sea lanes and occupy strategic places. Portuguese and Turkish contention in the Horn of Africa became intertwined with the tribal and religious conflicts in the region. It was thus by exploiting the internal contract. 3. Dictions of the region that the Turks, opposing the Portuguese, were able to occupy the Red Sea coast in 1557. Their repeated attempts to penetrate the Eritrean hinterland were, however, stiffly resisted. Unable to break this resistance, especially after 1589, they gave the viceroyship to the chief of the Bello tribes under the title of the Nabe and continued their nominal rule for about 3 centuries until 1865. As the Turks grew weaker, they enabled Egypt to revive its political power by granting it internal autonomy. In the beginning of the 19th century, Mohammed Ali Pasha was able to easily defeat the Fung kingdom and, expanding to the western lowlands of present-day Eritrea, he compelled the Beni Amr Diglaus to accept his IW suzerainty. Afterwards, the Egyptians took over the Red Sea coast from the Turks in 1867, but their repeated attempts to expand to the hinterland were frustrated by popular resistance. Their rule was thus confined to Karen and the coastal areas until they were weakened by the Mahdists and finally driven out by the Italians in 1885. The late 19th century was a period during which West European imperialist countries divided up and partitioned Africa to exploit its natural resources and cheap labor power, secure big markets for their industrial production and to occupy strategic regions that can serve them to control their foreign trade and monopolize their trade routes. The 1885 Berlin Conference was only the official partitioning of Africa. The West European imperialist countries which had planned to invest their capital in India and the Arab countries in anticipation of the fastest super profits found it necessary to open the Suez Canal and occupy key strategic positions on the shores of the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa in order to control the commerce in the Red Sea and Indian Ocean that was run by the Turks and 4. Arabs. While Great Britain and France were the principal contenders in the region, Italy played the role of a junior ally of British imperialism. Imperialist Italy, exploiting the contention between Great Britain and France on the one hand, the competition between the kings of Shoa and Tigray on the other, and the Mahdist expansionist ambitions and the weakening of the Egyptians on the third, set foot on the shores of the Red Sea in 1869 under the pretext of establishing a missionary and trading station. Gradually, it brought over military forces and, exploiting the contradictions between the contending and rival feudalists, occupied the whole of Eritrea in 1890. Although the western and eastern lowlands were nominally under Egypt before imperialist Italy occupied Eritrea, the Beja territories, invaded by the Mahdists, were in a state of chaos. Different tribal sultans were ruling in Denkel. The sharpening contradictions and power struggles between the Hazaga and Tsiska feudalists in the plateau provided opportune conditions for King Johannes of Tigray to occupy and rule it through his viceroy, Ras Alula, just before the advent of the Italians. By integrating these disparate territories and establishing a centralized administrative system, imperialist Italy brought forth Eritrea as a multinational state with a definite political and geographic identity. During the second half of the 19th century, the Horn of Africa was subjected not only to the expansion of capitalist rule but also to the expansion of feudal rule. In what is today Ethiopia, the kingdoms of Tigray, Gajajam, and Shoa were growing stronger and undergoing feudal integration or centralization in the 19th century, and were contending with each other for expansion. The kingdom of Shoa under Menelik was finally able to predominate. 5. Racialismo sur racial segregatio, because it managed to strike a deal with the Italian colonialists and acquire superiority in arms, while the kingdoms of Tigray and Gajajam were weakened as a result of Italian and Mahdist aggression. King Menelik had a hand in the colonial conspiracy to partition and occupy the Horn of Africa. Exploiting the rivalries and contention among Great Britain, France, and Italy, he invaded the Oromo lands, put the territories of Tigray and Gajajam under his control and, at the close of the 19th century, established a centralized feudal Ethiopian state whose boundaries formed the demarcation line between capitalist, colonial, and feudal rule. The argument put forth by Ethiopian expansionists and their historians that Eritrea was part of Ethiopia before the coming of Italian colonialism only signifies their desire to conceal, in the pursuit of their expansionist aims, the time and the circumstances under which Eritrea and Ethiopia were formed as countries with defined political and geographic identities. Besides trampling upon the human and democratic rights of the Eritrean people and imposing a system of racial segregation, Italian colonialism seized all land in the Faulands and northern highlands as well as extensive fertile agricultural areas and meadows in the plateau in the name of domains, and reduced life in the countryside to an extremely deplorable state. Denying the Eritrean people educational and medical services, it perpetrated untold ignorance and diseases. Although Italian colonialism built factories in the pursuit of its imperialist aims and provided for the emergence of the Eritrean working class, it was also exploiting and encouraging the feudal features of our society in an effort to assure and prolong its rule. In the pursuit of its interests, it brought forth the economic integration of the different parts of Eritrea. In their struggle against Italian colonial oppression and the intense 6. racial segregation that attended it, the Eritrean people forged a strong national identity and developed a unified psychological makeup. The imperialist countries, in their bitter competition and contention to expand their colonies and divide and redivide continents, launched the two world wars. This situation weakened the imperialist countries and strengthened the colonized peoples. Although the Eritrean people, fighting alongside the Allied powers during the Second World War, drove out Italian colonialism in 1941, Eritrea passed over from Italian colonialism to British colonialism. From the outset, Great Britain conspired to abolish the political existence of Eritrea by partitioning it between its colony, Sudan, and its neo-colony, feudal Ethiopia. To this end, it set out to destroy the economic infrastructure of Eritrea in an effort to make it appear economically inviable and to inflame non-basic contradictions so as to divide the Eritrean people along religious and tribal lines and weaken their unity. Although it did not succeed in partitioning Eritrea, Great Britain managed to wreck the Eritrean economy and sow discord among the Eritrean people. Although the 1940s witnessed the emergence of several political parties in Eritrea, the Eritrean people's struggle for independence could not triumph because none of the parties had the correct line, strength, and cohesiveness to unite the majority of the Eritrean people around itself, overcome the machinations of imperialism and neocolonialism, and lead the Eritrean people to independence. As the future of Eritrea could not be determined in the discussions held among the four powers, it was transferred to the then U.S. imperialist-dominated UN. There, in 1950, at the fifth regular session of the UN General Assembly, U.S. imperialism pushed through the Federal Res. 7. Resolution 390A/V, to assure its imperialist and neocolonial interests, secure the expansionist objectives of the Amhara feudalists, and provide them with access to the sea, all this against the wishes and at the expense of the independence of the Eritrean people. Under the guise of federation, Eritrea was put under the yoke of neocolonial Ethiopia, and U.S. imperialism established military bases in Eritrea. Thus, it was immediately clear that this was designed to protect the interests of imperialism in the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa. As soon as Ethiopia set foot in Eritrea under the guise of federation, it violated the federal resolution, banned the freedom of the press, smashed the free popular organizations and political parties, suppressed the Eritrean languages and culture, imposed the language and culture of the Amhara ruling classes, persecuted and jailed patriots, and placed a large occupation army all over Eritrea to intimidate the people and crush their resistance. The Eritrean people, drawing valuable lessons from their experience, continued their struggle against the ever-intensifying oppression. When they began to intensify their struggle, with the worker and student movements and other patriots in the big cities in the forefront, feudal Ethiopia escalated its atrocities. When it pulled down the Eritrean flag in 1958, workers, students and other patriots were clandestinely organized and began to lead the national movement through a secret organization known as Maber Shoat in the cities, and the Eritrean liberation movement abroad came to realize that peaceful means alone could not win victory or independence and began to look for other means to advance their struggle. While such was the general trend, certain self-exiled traditional leaders and their collaborators established a small armed band under the name of the Eritrean Liberation Front, ELF. This was done out of purely competitive considerations without consulting the forces that were already studying the means and preparing for armed struggle. At the time of its formation, this front not only lacked a clear nationalist line with defined objectives, but it was also formed by and composed of an extremely backward clique incompatible with the demands of the time. As the armed struggle evolved, the people began to support it simply because, as an armed resistance to Ethiopia's barbarous rule, it expressed the Eritrean people's hatred of Ethiopian colonialism. In November 1962, the Haile Selassie regime, trampling underfoot the legitimate rights of the Eritrean people and violating the UN Federal Resolution, which only the UN could change with the consent of the Eritrean people, officially declared that the autonomous state of Eritrea would henceforth become a province of Ethiopia. There is no record in history when either the UN General Assembly or the Security Council has raised its voice against the barbarous oppression of the Eritrean people under Ethiopian colonialism, not even when the Ethiopian regime flagrantly violated the very resolution of the UN and officially stood against justice and peace. From the very beginning, the ELF followed a line that was incapable of articulating patriotic feelings and fostered divisions based on competitive feudal sentiments. As it grew larger in men and arms, the discord grew worse. To calm down the competition among the fledgling feudalists and to better exploit the divisions, the reactionary clique abroad, that was posing as the front's leadership and painting the just struggle of the Eritrean people in various non-patriotic colors, divided Eritrea into 5 military zones in 1964-65. They divided the ELF into 5 divisions on the basis of religion and nationality, and each division 9 was made to operate in one of the zones. This zonal division was detrimental to the unity of the Eritrean people, as it was based on the exploitation of their secondary contradictions to the benefit of the reactionary clique. Moreover, the reactionary clique designated itself the Supreme Council and, posing as the patriarchate of the revolution and clamoring from outside, focused on seeking aid beneficial to itself. The period of the military zones was a time when the zones were rivals, competing and contending against each other and squabbling over territorial boundaries. The leaders of the zones, far from helping each other, were rejoicing at the defeat of one another. Not only were they collecting money from the people through taxes, fines and donations, but they were also accumulating property for the future by openly looting cattle and other property from the people. When the fighters began to oppose these corrupt, unpatriotic, and non-revolutionary practices, many of them were incarcerated, dismissed, or liquidated by the feudalists of the military zones. As the situation deteriorated and a state of crisis was created, the Ethiopian regime, exploiting the weaknesses of the divided ELF army, launched an unprecedented campaign in 1967, attacked the zones one at a time, and perpetrated barbarous atrocities on the oppressed Eritrean people who had wholeheartedly extended their support to the revolution. There was no zone that put up sufficient resistance in its respective region, let alone cooperated with the others during the whole time Ethiopia was burning hundreds of villages, massacring, bayoneting, and burning thousands of children, women and old people, butchering innumerable livestock, forcing thousands of people to take refuge in the Sudan, and displacing thousands more from their homes. 10. As the situation kept on deteriorating, the democratic force, made up of armed combatants and the masses, was already in a state of ferment, began to intensify its resistance. It put forward principal demands calling for the abolition of the feudal zones and the establishment of a unified army, the presence of the leadership in the field, and the convening of a conference to resolve these issues. However, the Supreme Council, the Revolutionary Command, the zone commanders and their collaborators conspired to divide and weaken the movement which was against their interests and to ensure that the first and second zones, over which they had more influence, did not unite with the three other zones. However, the democratic movement which was struggling to bring about complete unity vigorously persisted and succeeded in bringing about the unity of three zones. Condemning the Supreme Council and the Revolutionary Command, it established a provisional leadership in the field. The united force of the three zones proved the correctness of its aims through the struggles it waged to mobilize the people and the operations it conducted against the enemy, and enjoyed increasing popular support. Because they found the presence and development of the united force detrimental to their selfish interests, the Supreme Council, the Revolutionary Command, and their reactionary collaborators in the field attempted to disrupt and weaken it from within by plotting with the pseudo-democratic and opportunist elements who, unable to trespass the mass line, had joined the united force and managed to worm their way into positions of leadership. This could not bear them immediate results, and they were becoming increasingly exposed in front of the masses. Thus, changing tactics and pretending that they now accepted the 11. Unity that they had rejected earlier, they hatched new plots and agreed to convene the 1969 Adabha Conference. Among the principal resolutions of the Adabha Conference were the convening of a national congress within a year, the setting up of a provisional leadership in the field to coordinate the army until the convening of the National Congress, and the establishment of a preparatory committee to examine crimes committed against the fight and the masses. Almost all of these resolutions were taken from the proposals of the United Force. It is true that at the Adabha Conference the United Force needed positions in the executive bodies from which to wage its struggle. Its immediate aim, however, was the attainment of unity of the five divisions, while its long-term goal was to give the quality and composition of the front appropriate form after a year-long struggle. Analyzing the obstacles posed by the reactionary side, and in the face of the treachery and conspiracies of reactionaries and opportunists within itself, the United Force not only did not set up any precondition, but it also compromised on several points in order to realize its aim of unity of the five divisions and to avoid giving the reactionary side a pretext to retreat, which it certainly would have done had the democratic force rigidly held on to its position. As the objective of the reactionary side in the conference was to seize executive power by any means, it presented the preconditions that the provisional leadership to be established be made up of 38 members, that the three zones of the United Force hold 18 positions while the two zones be given 10 each, that each unit separately select its own, and that the Supreme Council should remain unaffected. Accordingly, the General Command, composed of a majority of swindlers, was established after effecting tribal deals and alliances and the predominance of Risi. 12. Teonarise hit its climax in the history of the armed struggle of the Eritrean people. The General Command did not give the resistance force the opportunity to struggle from within. Immediately after its establishment, it reorganized the army to suit its purposes and began to liquidate the resistance forces. Within a period of 3 months, it killed many fighters, jailed still more, and dismissed hundreds from the field under various pretexts. The Eritrean field saw an unprecedented fascist dictatorship of reactionaries. Under such circumstances, it was impossible to resist even from abroad, in the Sudan, for instance, let alone to struggle from within the front. As there was no other alternative, the democratic force had to separate from the ELF and establish an independent organization so as to enable the Eritrean revolution to march on a correct path. Hence, the democratic force, uniting all the resistance elements, established the Eritrean People's Liberation Forces, EPLF, in 1970. Although the General Command had never refrained from scheming to liquidate the EPLF ever since the latter's formation as an organization, its attempts were ending up in failure because they could not receive the collaboration of many fighters. When the E.P.L.F., embarking upon the broadest field of work, began to politicize, organize, and defend the people and to provide shelter for the resistors hitherto unable to find a way out of the General Command, the General Command convened its so-called National Congress in an effort to legitimize its liquidationist philosophy in the name of the fighters and the people, designated the EPLF as counter-revolutionary, passed liquidationist resolutions, set up the Revolutionary Council as the leadership to implement them, and declared the Civil War at the end of February 1972. The EPLF. Raising the slogan of all. 13. Our guns against the primary enemy, democratic solution for the secondary contradictions, persisted in self-defense, vis-a-vis the ELF. The Revolutionary Council, however, overly intoxicated with the illusion of a quick victory, waged the civil war for 3 years, causing the loss and injury of a great number of cadres and fighters, the destruction of enormous property of the revolution, and provided the enemy with the opportunity to prepare for further aggression. Moreover, the civil war brought sorrow to and affected low morale among the Eritrean masses. It also created among our supporters, excepting those who had an interest in the internecine killing of Eritreans, a negative attitude toward the just struggle of the Eritrean people. Although the forces that formed the EPLF represented the conscious and oppressed fighters within the ELF, they were unable to organize a coordinated departure. As in the development of all national struggles, the democratic forces included in its ranks groups and individuals who merely shared a common political stand of rejection. Although the EPLF was created in a revolutionary process, it also contains some opportunist elements. Thus it is an organization that has been built and shaped in the flames of vigorous struggle against Ethiopian colonial aggression as well as the liquidationist aggression of the Revolutionary Council on the one hand and against reactionaries and opportunists within its ranks on the other. It made a great effort to bring about step by step, in the course of a common struggle, the unity of outlook of the different units which, in the beginning, had their own separate administrations. It persisted to explain the meaning and the consequences of the civil war that was ignited by the Revolutionary Council to the broad masses, the fighters of the ELF and friendly countries. It 14. Simultaneously clarified its correct and principled stand of democratic dialogue. On the military front, the EPLF scored brilliant victories by crushing the Revolutionary Council forces that were conducting frenzied attacks to liquidate it. Through courageous determination and perseverance, it assured its survival and the continuity of the revolution. In the course of the bitter civil war, the Revolutionary Council grew weaker and lost its strategic military superiority. Hence, the masses of the people who had long had their mouths shut began to take steps to stop the civil war, while the forces within the ELF long opposed to the civil war refused to direct their guns at the EPLF. Thus the civil war was brought to a halt toward the end of 1974 in a spontaneous manner in the interest of the masses. When the civil war was brought to an end and there developed growing understanding among the fighters of the two fronts in the interests of the Eritrean masses, the retrograde elements and their external accomplices who found the cessation of the civil war a bitter pill to swallow set out to hatch new conspiracies. The basic aim of the conspiracy was to create a new political crisis between the ELF and the EPLF by obstructing the then ongoing dialogue among the fighters. The tactic was to immediately change one's true colors and pose as the champions of unity. As usual, this had to take on its legal form. The Second National Congress of the ELF was convened and the E.P.L.F's old slogan of democratic dialogue for secondary contradictions was raised as a new slogan of the Second National Congress. When the Revolutionary Council went to Baghdad to explain the resolutions of its 15. Congress, it coincidentally met with the ex-foreign mission of the EPLF. The principal author of the conspiracy, for whom the spontaneous cessation of the civil war, the beginning of dialogue among the fighters and their growing rapport in the interest of the masses had all along been too bitter to swallow. The Revolutionary Council and the ex-Foreign Minister reached a sudden agreement at their coincidental Baghdad meeting. This was followed by a meeting in Beirut. The agreement took on its legal form on September 1975 in Khartoum. The main provisions of the agreement stipulated the immediate merger of the two organizations, even though it was clear from the outset that this was unacceptable to the EPLF since immediate merger was contrary to its proposal for a united front. Of course, the aim here was to misconstrue the E.P.L.F's principled rejection of the conspiratorial agreement for opposition to national unity and have it condemned by the Eritrean masses and friendly countries. Indeed, the conspiracy was designed to strangulate, disrupt, or dominate the EPLF by depriving it of external material, financial and morale support. It is no secret that there is also an external force collaborating in this conspiracy by providing military, financial and publicity support to the line that represents its interests in Eritrea. Clearly seeing through the conspiracy in advance, however, the EPLF had declared that it would neither participate in nor bear the responsibility for the consequences of the agreement long before the Khartoum meeting. It had much earlier clarified its viewpoint on unity and the correct method of its achievement, as well as established a committee to 16. Represent it to that end in the official dialogue to be carried out between the EPLF and the ELF. It had also called for the resolution of the outstanding issues in its relations with the ex-foreign mission through dialogue. Yet, the ex-foreign mission, PRODED by its accomplices and relying on the weapons and money it had collected in the name of the EPLF, sought to reverse the will of history. Driven by the illusion that the EPLF would, from hunger and exhaustion, soon submit to its dictation, the ex-foreign mission severed its relations with the EPLF on March 23, 1976. Under the guise of national unity, it has since then been hatching divisive conspiracies unprecedented in the history of the Eritrean people in a futile attempt to turn back the will of the revolution. The EPLF, fully aware that all the conspiracies being hatched in the name of national unity serve not only to weaken and subvert the Eritrean revolution but also to provide the enemy with a breathing space to escalate its aggression and bring about long-term consequences that are contrary to the wishes and interests of the Eritrean masses, is making the necessary effort to resist all divisive and liquidationist conspiracies and to achieve the genuine unity of the Eritrean people by proposing the correct method of dialogue and unity between the two organizations, the EPLF and the ELF. The EPLF, as the culmination of the democratic resistance to the reactionary experience, was established to safeguard the interests of the oppressed Eritrean people and assure the continuity of the Eritrean Revolution. Right from its inception as a revolutionary organization, it has waged resolute and 17. matchless struggles against imperialism, the Ethiopian colonialist puppets and the reactionary liquidators. After 1975 in particular, it has achieved great victories against the primary enemy unparalleled in the Eritrean field on the military as well as on other fronts. It has expanded and consolidated the liberated areas, crushed hitherto seemingly invincible reactionary forces, and emerged as a firm and powerful revolutionary force flexing its muscles. It has convened its first organizational congress and ushered in a new era in the Eritrean Revolution. Changing its name to the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, E.P.L.F. A name that appropriately expresses its progress, it is intensifying its struggle with a new spirit and vigor in order to realize its aims. Haile Selassie's backward feudal regime, supported by U.S. imperialism, had perpetrated political oppression upon the Ethiopian people, thrown them into a deplorable state under which they could no longer survive even from hand to mouth, and brought about the decimation through famine of hundreds of thousands. It had unleashed barbarous atrocities against nature and property in order to colonize and oppress the Eritrean people. After ruling no less than 40 years, the old regime collapsed in 1974 as a result of the struggle of the Ethiopian people and the blows of the Eritrean people's revolution. However, as there was no revolutionary political party or force capable of leading the Ethiopian people's struggle to victory during the decline and fall of Haile Selassie's barbarous regime, the Dergu, a clique of officers made up of Haile Selassie's former henchmen, was able to seize state power. At the moment of crisis, when the military clique, hurriedly banded together from here and there, usurped state power, self-styled pseudo-progressive intellectuals who coveted the vacant chairs they saw immediately jumped to the side of the 18. Dergu and became its accomplices. As its chief sycophants and henchmen, their role is to disguise the Dergu's fascism and its anti-people crimes through sloganeering. The Dergu declared Ethiopian socialism to isolate the Eritrean revolution and the Ethiopian people's democratic movements, as well as to deceive and swindle the Eritrean and Ethiopian masses. As if socialism is something that can be brought about through declarations and military coups d'états, we see that the Dergu has achieved socialism in Ethiopia through meaningless declarations within a year. That all the Dergu's clamour and fanfare are designed for public consumption and deceit and not for the interests of the starving Ethiopian masses is concretely demonstrated by the rapidly deteriorating living conditions of the masses, as well as the growing resistance of the democratic forces and oppressed peoples. These slogans, lacking popular organs for their implementation, are being declared to deceive the people, to generate a war economy and for external consumption. In no way do they serve the interests of the masses of the Ethiopian workers and peasants. The Ethiopian workers have derived no gains from the nationalization of domestic or foreign capital. Far from seizing power and playing their vanguard role, they are denied their basic rights. Suffering from fast declining living conditions, they are daily waging ever-rising resistance. The peasants are also deriving no benefits, as the land nationalization has remained a nominal decree on paper. Amhara chauvinism masquerading as socialism is inflicting untold suffering on the various nationalities of Ethiopia. The people are deprived of their right to establish their own people's power, while the country suffers the harsh rule of a clique of a handful of officers. Thus, progressive Ethiopians and the oppressed Ethiopian nationalities, better organized than ever, have 19. Today brought their struggle to new heights. Nowhere is the Dergu's essence more clearly evident than in its views and actions regarding the Eritrean question. None of the Dergu's continuously changing economic, political, and military policies can be seen in isolation from the millions of dollars it is pouring in Eritrea, the conspiracies it has been hatching to subvert the just struggle of the Eritrean people, and the barbarous and fascist military operations it has been conducting. The Dergu's fascism against the Eritrean people has few historical parallels. As the primary objective and policy of the Dergu is to annihilate the Eritrean revolution through military force, it has from time to time made several attempts to realize this dream. Its first attempt of February 1975, aimed at the annihilation of the Eritrean revolution within a month, was turned back when the Dergu suffered its first historic defeat. The second time, trying to reduce the oppressed Ethiopian rural masses into instruments of its military aggression, it mobilized through compulsion and deceit scores of thousands of miserable peasants and dispatched them to Eritrea under the guise of a volunteer campaign. This attempt was also crushed before it could even set foot on Eritrean soil. Since then, it has made various attempts under different names, such as the deployment of the Israeli-trained Nebelbal Flame Brigade. They have all failed under the powerful blows of our Revolutionary People's Army. After all this, the Dergu is today making new military preparations with its US-granted weapons and ammunition to use the Ethiopian masses, who are in a state of ferment, as cannon fodder in its war of aggression in the name of defending the motherland. The Dergu's second tactic is political and aims at isolating the Eritrean revolution internally and externally. It 20. Has been raising the slogan of peaceful solution to camouflage its military preparations while intensifying its war of aggression. The first slogan of peaceful solution, lacking concrete proposals, failed miserably along with its February 1975 offensive. Since then, it has made several attempts in the hope of creating schisms within the Eritrean revolution. Finally, it has openly declared that its peaceful solution means internal autonomy and is busy conducting a frantic political campaign. As this kind of peaceful solution has found no audience internally, it is mainly directed outside to swindle progressive world opinion and isolate the Eritrean revolution internationally. However, the EPLF has, in the face of all the obstacles posed by internal reactionaries, taught the Dergu a big lesson by exposing its fascist essence and crushing its aggressive military campaigns ever since the cessation of the civil war. Eritrea is a colonial and semi-feudal country. The vast majority of its people are peasants who live from hand to mouth under backward agriculture and nomadism. The natural and human resources of Eritrea serve the colonialists, imperialists, Zionists and Eritrean lackeys. Political power, factories, banks, ports, trade, etc., are all in the hands of Ethiopian colonialism and its imperialist masters. Extensive fertile land has been taken away from the people in the name of state domains serving the colonial regime, foreign exploiters, and their Eritrean collaborators. As a result, the livelihood of the toiling masses of our people continues to deteriorate, going from bad to worse conditions. Eritrean workers are deprived of all rights, receive extremely low wages, suffer from severe unemployment and live under extremely bad conditions. Ethiopian colonialism and its imperialist masters strive hard to destroy the Eritrean identity by suppressing the culture and traditions. 21. Of the Eritrean people and spreading their decadent cultures and customs. They sow religious, nationality, tribal, and regional discord to wreck the unity and undermine the progress of the Eritrean people. Colonialist Ethiopia could not have occupied Eritrea or fought against the Eritrean people for so long without the political, military, economic, and diplomatic support of imperialism. It is crystal clear that the military capability which it is daily using to kill our people and destroy their livelihood is entirely the gift of the US and Israel. The enemies of the Eritrean people are Ethiopian colonialism, world imperialism, Israeli Zionism, and domestic reaction. It is inevitable therefore that the Eritrean people wage a national and democratic struggle in order to defeat these forces which are the obstacles to the development of Eritrean society. It is to fulfill the historical tasks of the national democratic revolution that the EPLF ever since its formation in 1970, has been fighting to unite the workers, peasants, and other democratic and patriotic forces in a single front. To achieve independence and freedom, peace and justice, prosperity and progress for the Eritrean people, the EPLF, led by a correct revolutionary line and based on the Worker-Peasant Alliance, shall fight to implement the ensuing objectives until complete and final victory. 22. National Democratic Program. Objectives. B. 1. Establish a people's democratic state. A. Abolish the Ethiopian colonial administrative organs and all anti-national and undemocratic laws, as well as nullify the military, economic, and political treaties affecting Eritrea signed between colonial Ethiopia and other governments. Safeguard the interests of the masses of workers, peasants, and other democratic forces. C. Set up a People's Assembly constituted of people's representatives democratically and freely elected from anti-feudal and anti-imperialist patriotic forces. The People's Assembly shall draw the Constitution, promulgate laws, elect the People's Administration and ratify national economic plans and new treaties. D. Protect the people's democratic rights, freedom of speech, the press, assembly, worship, and peaceful demonstration, develop anti-feudal and anti-imperialist worker, peasant, women, student, and youth organizations. Assure all Eritrean citizens equality before the law without distinction as to nationality, tribe, region, sex, cultural level, occupation, position, wealth, faith, etc. F. Severely punish Eritrean lackeys of Ethiopian colonialism who have committed crimes against the nation and the people. 2. Build an independent, self-reliant and planned national economy. Agriculture. Confiscate all land in the hands of the aggressor Ethiopian regime, the imperialists, Zionists, and Eritrean lackeys and put it in the service of the Eritrean masses. Make big nationalized farms and extensive farms requiring modern techniques state farms and use their produce for the benefit of the masses. Abolish feudal land relations and carry out an equitable distribution of land. Strive to introduce cooperative farms by creating conditions of cooperation and mutual assistance so as to develop a modern and advanced system of agriculture and animal husbandry capable of increasing the income and improving the lot of the peasantry. Induce the peasants to adopt modern agricultural techniques, introduce them to advanced agricultural implements and provide them with advisors, experts, veterinary services, fertilizers, wells, dams, transportation, finance, etc. in order to alleviate their problems and improve their livelihood and working conditions. Provide the nomads with veterinary services, livestock breeding experts, agricultural advisors, and financial assistance in order to enable them to lead settled lives, adopt modern techniques of agriculture and animal husbandry and improve their livelihood. Provide for the peaceful and amicable settlement of land disputes and inequality among individuals and villages in such a way as to harmonize the interest of the aggrieved party with that of the national economic interest. Advance the economic and living conditions in, and bridge the gap between, the cities and the countryside. Make pastures and forests state property, preserve wildlife and forestry, and fight soil erosion. Maintain a proper balance between agriculture and industry in the context of the planned economy. Promote an association that will organize, politicize, and arm the peasants with a clear revolutionary outlook so they can fully participate in the anti-colonial and anti-feudal struggle, defend the gains of the revolution, free themselves from oppression and economic exploitation, and manage their own affairs. Nationalize all industries in the hands of the imperialists, Zionists, Ethiopian colonialists and their Eritrean lackeys as well as resident aliens opposed to Eritrean independence. Nationalize big industries, ports, mines, public transport, communications, power plants and other basic economic resources. Exploit marine resources, expand the production of salt and other minerals, develop the fish industry, explore oil and other minerals. Allow nationals who were not opposed to the independence of Eritrea to participate in national construction by owning small factories and workshops compatible with national development and the system of administration. Strive to develop heavy industry so as to promote light industry, advance agriculture, and combat industrial dependence. Nationalize all insurance companies and banks, so as to centralize banking operations, regulate economic activities and accelerate economic development. Establish a government-owned central national bank and issue an independent national currency. Prohibit usury in all its forms and extend credit at the lowest interest in order to eliminate the attendant exploitation of the masses. Design and implement an appropriate tariffs policy to secure the domestic market for the nation's agricultural, industrial, and handicraft products. Formulate and implement an equitable and rational taxation policy to administer and defend the country, carry out production and social functions. Construct essential land, air, and sea transportation and communications to develop the nation's trade. Handle all import and export trade. Nationalize the big trading companies and regulate the small ones. Prohibit the export of essential commodities and limit the import of luxury goods. Regulate the exchange and pricing of the various domestic products. Strictly prohibit contraband trade. Establish trade relations with all countries that respect Eritrean sovereignty irrespective of political systems. Urban land and housing. Make urban land state property. Nationalize all excess urban houses in order to abolish exploitation through rent and improve the livelihood of the masses. Set, taking the standard of living into account, a rational rent price in order to improve the living conditions of the masses. Compensate citizens for nationalized property in accordance with a procedure based on personal income and the condition of the national economy. Build appropriate modern houses to alleviate the shortage of housing for the masses. 3. Develop culture, education, technology, and public health. A. Culture. 1. Obliterate the decadent culture and disgraceful ill habits that Ethiopian colonialism, world imperialism and Zionism have spread in order to subjugate and exploit the Eritrean people and destroy their identity. In the new educational curriculum, provide for the 2. Proper dissemination, respect, and development of the history of Eritrea and its people, the struggle against colonialism, oppression, and for national independence, the experience, sacrifices and heroism as well as the national folklore, traditions, and culture of the Eritrean people. Destroy the bad aspects of the culture and traditions of Eritrean society and develop its good and progressive content. Ensure that the Eritrean people glorify and eternally cherish the memory of the heroic martyrs of the struggle for independence who, guided by revolutionary principles, gave their lives for the salvation of their people and country. Combat illiteracy to free the Eritrean people from the darkness of ignorance. Provide for universal compulsory education up to the middle school. Establish institutions of higher education in the various fields of science, arts, technology, agriculture, etc. Grant students scholarships to pursue studies in the various fields of learning. Establish schools in the various regions of Eritrea in accordance with the need. Separate education from religion. Make the state run all the schools and provide free education at all levels. Integrate education with production and put it in the service of the masses. 9. Enable nationals, especially the students and youth, to train and develop themselves in the sciences, literature, handicrafts, and technology through the formation of their own organizations. 10. Provide favorable work conditions for experts and the skilled to enable them to utilize their skills and knowledge in the service of the masses. 11. Engage in educational, cultural, and technological exchange with other countries on the basis of mutual benefit and equality. Render medical services freely to the people. Eradicate contagious diseases and promote public health by building the necessary hospitals and health centers all over Eritrea. Scientifically develop traditional medicine. Establish sports and athletic facilities and popularize them among the masses. 4. Safeguard social rights. Workers' rights. 1. Politicize and organize the workers, whose participation in the struggle had been hindered by the reactionary line and leaderships, and enable them, in a higher and more organized form, to play their vanguard role in the revolution. Abolish the system of labor laws and sham trade unions set up by Ethiopian colonialism and its imperialist masters to exploit and oppress Eritrean workers. Enforce an 8-hour working day and protect the right of workers to rest 1 day a week and 25 days a year. Promulgate a special labor code that properly protects the rights of workers and enables them to form unions. Assure workers comfortable housing and decent living conditions. Devise a social security program to care for and assist workers who, because of illness, disability, or age, are unable to work. Prohibit unjustified dismissals and undue pay cuts. Protect the right of workers to participate in the management and administration of enterprises and industries. Struggle to eliminate unemployment and protect every citizen's right to work. B. Women's rights. Develop an association through which women can participate in the struggle against colonial aggression and for social transformation. Outline a broad program to free women from domestic confinement, develop their participation in social production, and raise their political, cultural, and technical levels. Assure women full rights of equality with men in politics, economy, and social life as well as equal pay for equal work. Promulgate progressive marriage and family laws. Protect the right of women workers to 2 months maternity leave with full pay. Protect the right of mothers and children, provide delivery, nursery, and kindergarten services. Fight to eradicate prostitution. Respect the right of women not to engage in work harmful to their health. Design programs to increase the number and upgrade the quality of women leaders and public servants. Families of martyrs, disabled fighters and others needing social assistance. Provide necessary care and assistance to all fighters and other citizens who, in the course of the struggle against Ethiopian colonialism and for national salvation, have suffered disability in jails or in armed combat. Provide assistance and relief to the victims of Ethiopian colonial aggression, orphans, the old and the disabled as well as those harmed by natural causes. Render necessary assistance and care for the families of martyrs. 5. Ensure the equality and consolidate the unity of nationalities. Abolish the system and laws instituted by imperialism, Ethiopian colonialism, and their lackeys in order to divide, oppress and exploit the Eritrean people. Rectify all errors committed by opportunists in the course of the struggle. Combat national chauvinism as well as narrow nationalism. Nurture and strengthen the unity and fraternity of Eritrean nationalities. Accord all nationalities equal rights and responsibilities in leading them toward national progress and salvation. Train cadres from all nationalities in various fields to assure common progress. Safeguard the right of all nationalities to preserve and develop their spoken or written language. Safeguard the right of all nationalities to preserve and develop their progressive culture and traditions. Forcefully oppose those who, in the pursuit of their own interests, create cliques on the basis of nationality, tribe, region, etc. and obstruct the unity of the revolution and the people. 6. Build a strong people's army. A. Liberate the land and the people step by step through the strategy of people's war. Build a strong land, air, and naval force capable of defending the country's borders, territorial waters, airspace and territorial integrity as well as the full independence, progress, and dignity of its people in order to attain prosperity and reach the highest economic stage. The People's Army shall be politically conscious, imbued with comradely relations, steeled through revolutionary discipline, full of resoluteness, imbued with a spirit of self-sacrifice, participating in production, and 32. Equipped with modern tactics, weapons, and skills. Being the defender of the interests of the workers and peasants, it serves the entire people of Eritrea irrespective of religion, nationality, or sex. The basis of this army is the revolutionary force presently fighting for national independence and liberation. B. Establish a people's militia to safeguard the gains of the revolution and support the people's army in the liberated and semi-liberated areas. C. Establish a progressive and advanced military academy. 7. Respect freedom of religion and faith. Safeguard every citizen's freedom of religion and belief. Completely separate religion from the state and politics. Separate religion from education and allow no compulsory religious education. Strictly oppose all the imperialist-created new counter revolutionary faiths, such as Jehovah's Witness, Pentecostal, Baha'i, etc. Legally punish those who try to sow discord in the struggle and undermine the progress of the Eritrean people on the basis of religion, whether in the course of the armed struggle or in a people's democratic Eritrea. 8. Provide humane treatment to prisoners of war and encourage the desertion of Eritrean soldiers serving the enemy. A. Oppose the efforts of Ethiopian colonialism to conscript duped soldiers to serve as tools of aggression for the oppression and slaughter of the Eritrean people. B. Encourage Eritrean soldiers and plainclothesmen who have been duped into serving in the Ethiopian colonial army to return to the just cause and join their people in the struggle against Ethiopian aggression and welcome them to its ranks with full right of equality. C. Provide humane treatment and care for Ethiopian war prisoners. D. Severely punish the die-hard, criminal, and atrocious henchmen and lackeys of Ethiopian colonialism. 9. Protect the rights of Eritreans residing abroad. A struggle to organize Eritreans residing abroad in the already formed mass organizations so they can participate in the patriotic anti-colonial struggle. Strive to secure the rights of Eritrean refugees in the neighboring countries, win them the assistance of international organizations, and work for the improvement of their living conditions. C. Welcome nationals who want to return to their town. Try and participate in their people's daily struggles and advances. 34. D. Encourage the return and create the means for the rehabilitation of Eritreans forced to flee their country and land by the vicious aggression and oppression of Ethiopian colonialism. 10. Respect the rights of foreigners residing in Eritrea. A. Grant full rights of residence and work to aliens who have openly or covertly supported the Eritrean people's struggle against Ethiopian colonial oppression and for national salvation and are willing to live in harmony with the legal system to be established. mercilessly punish aliens who, as lackeys and followers of Ethiopian colonialism, imperialism, and Zionism, spy on or become obstacles to the Eritrean people. 11. Pursue a foreign policy of peace and non-alignment. Welcome the assistance of any country or organization which recognizes and supports the just struggle of the Eritrean people without interference in its internal affairs. B. Establish diplomatic relations with all countries irrespective of political and economic system on the basis of the following 5 principles: respect for each other's independence, territorial integrity and national sovereignty, mutual non-aggression, non-interference in internal affairs, equality and mutual benefit, peaceful co-existence. Establish good friendly relations with all neighbors. Expand cultural, economic, and technological ties with all countries of the world compatible with national sovereignty and independence and based on equality. Do not align with any world military bloc or allow the establishment of any foreign military bases on Eritrean soil. Support all just and revolutionary movements, as our struggle is an integral part of the international revolutionary movement in general, and the struggle of the African, Asian, and Latin American peoples against colonialism, imperialism, Zionism and racial discrimination in particular. Victory to the masses. Adopted by the First Congress of the EPLF on January 31, 1977.